you must not be defeated. Maya Angelou. The Oxford definition of resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulty, toughness. So I'd like to start by asking you all a couple questions to see how we in this room relate to this term resilience. So raise your hand if before today you were familiar with the term resilience or you've heard about it. Cool. Raise your hand if you had to be resilient to some difficulty, some adversity in your life before. And raise your hand if you would like to create more resilience, either for yourself or for your loved ones, like your children, your spouse, your family, your friends. This show of hands demonstrates why resilience is important and the critical role I've seen it play in the lives of so many, and the role it's played in my life is why I became a resilience researcher. I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. My mother was a nurse who sometimes took on travel nursing assignments around the U.S., and my father is a U.S. Marine who also opened the first indoor rock climbing gym in New Orleans. So that meant I spent a lot of time at that gym. I had birthday parties there, whether or not I wanted to. And anything my sister or I asked my dad, the answer was, if you climb to the top, I'll think about it. In part, I was also raised by my grandmother, who, though she didn't have the opportunity to attend college, was a firm source of encouragement for me to complete my education and a constant source of love and support throughout my life. Because I lived with my mother, sometimes with my dad, and sometimes with my grandmother, I moved around the city a bit, and from pre-K through middle school, I attended 7 different schools. So I learned a lot about adapting to new environments and being the new person and making new friends. And though I wasn't always a fan of these changes, I learned to find the silver linings in things. But by the time I got to high school, I was sure this would be 4 years in one place with one set of friends, and I was looking forward to that. But unfortunately, August of my sophomore year, Hurricane Katrina happened. So the period following Katrina was one of the most stressful times of my life. To see the effects of a natural disaster exacerbated by inequity, with an estimated 1,200 of my fellow New Orleanians losing their life to this storm in the aftermath, disproportionately those who are African American and low-income recipients, to be called a refugee in your home, to sit in a hotel room in Beaumont, Texas, and watch a video of my dad arriving to the rock climbing gym in a boat, to return the following year with 50% of the population, people you knew, you associated with, you loved, unwilling or unable to come back to the city, and then to have my father deployed to Iraq the year after our return. So one thing I know for sure about resilience is it's not all flowers and butterflies. To be resilient, there must be some adversity that you're faced with. This is the aspect of the definition of resilience that distinguishes it from any other persistence-related phenomenon. So I approach this topic from both a lived and academic expertise. Over the last 8 years, I've read extensively and been able to contribute to this literature on resilience. And it makes sense that the earliest studies in this domain focused on children. So we were really interested in understanding how can some children who face adversities like growing up in poverty or having a parent who suffers from a mental disorder be able to achieve successes in life. And some of the things we learned from those studies were that things like having a stable caregiver in the child's life, the child's ability to envision a positive future self, or even teaching children to regulate their emotions were all things that linked to success later in life. However, we know much less about adults in terms of resilience and even less about adults in the workplace. So that's what I do. I'm an organizational psychologist. I study human behavior at work. Some of the studies we've done thus far look at critical populations like nurses in hospitals, dealing with time pressures, life or death decisions, what helps nurses to be resilient. I've also done some research looking at job seekers, so unemployed individuals facing consistent rejection and financial strain. So how can we help job seekers be more resilient? And even single working mothers, so people who have way less control over that time after work. How can we help them recover from a long day's work and be ready to be resilient the next day? And finally, some of the things that I've done include spending a summer living and working in New Zealand to study the effects of the 2011 series of earthquakes and how did organizations and employees overcome that. Because I'm an organizational psychologist, the question I get asked most often is how can we train employees to be resilient? What makes some adults more resilient than others? And though I think trainings and interventions are great, I think first it's critical that we have a really clear understanding of what is and what is not resilience. So I have 3 key insights from all this research that I would like to share about what resilience means. The first is that resilience is not success. Resilience is not your GPA, how much money you have in the bank, or whether or not you've already gotten into that dream school. Resilience is about the choices we make to continue to pursue our goals after adversity. So if at any one point you have not yet reached that goal, that does not relegate you to the category of non-resilient. In life, we're all dealt certain cards, and sometimes we reach significant outcomes. But the only thing fully under our control is that magic in between. The second thing is that resilience does not mean you have to accept the trauma and keep on doing whatever you were doing before. We know from the study of human behavior and stress that adversity can literally change us. It can shift our perspective and alter our environment and make it so that we literally can't do the things that we were doing before this experience. So we must not stigmatize individuals' choices to adjust strategies to get to their goal. For example, if you have a goal of, I want to be the VP of an organization one day, and you know that big picture goal must be broken down into smaller goals. So first I need to take on an international assignment, and I also need to, at some point, get a promotion here. But maybe you have an abusive supervisor, or maybe you suffer some personal hardship. That would mean you might have to adjust those goals. And you can't take on that international assignment, but you can take on an international client. Or maybe I will work to get a promotion, but in a different department or in a different organization that's healthier, so I can become that VP one day. Sometimes leaving a toxic environment, changing our strategies, adjusting study habits after failure, those are the most resilient things that we could do. The third thing is that resilience does not mean you don't feel the hard stuff. From our research, we've seen that those who score high in terms of resilience, they feel just as many and just as strong of negative emotions as everyone else. The difference about this high resilience group is that they're also still able to experience positive emotions in hard times. So this makes me understand why my brain started looking for the silver lining in everything. We are encouraged to feel in order to heal. So if you feel a burden, if you experience negative emotions, that does not mean you're not being resilient or that you can't overcome this difficulty. So to revisit that Oxford definition of this capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, remember that recovery is not just whether or not you've already gotten to that end point of your goal. And recovery does not mean you have to keep on doing whatever you were doing before the adversity. And toughness does not mean you don't feel negative emotions in hard times. I define resilience as adaptive, behavioral pursuit of your goals despite adversity. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave us a wonderful illustration of resilience in saying that if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. Resilience for me was deciding to wake up early, work out, meditate, journal, and work tirelessly towards my career goals when life decided that the last big accomplishment of mine that my grandmother would live to see was my PhD graduation. For New Orleans, resilience is right now celebrating Mardi Gras, the best season ever. And it was us coming together to form this newfound collective identity that binds us together like never before, in a spirit of love and fun that we share with those who visit. Resilience for us all means that we decide that any failure, obstacle, negative emotion, or moment of self-doubt is a comma in our goal pursuit chapter and never a period. Thank you.